All right, this is the matter of the application for permit for community marina of the Idaho Club North Lake PUD Marina Valiant Idaho LLC. Agency case number PH-2023-NAV-20-003. Office of Administrative Hearings case number 23-320-07. I am the assigned hearing officer, Leslie Hayes. Before we proceed with this scheduling conference, I just want to make sure that everybody we anticipate being present here today is present. I have Ms. Kaufman and Ms. Winters from the AG's office. Is there anyone beside Mr. Amer you anticipate from IDL?
No.
All right, and then I have Ms. Murdoch, which I believe is the representative for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Is there anybody else from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers going to be present here today, Ms. Murdoch?
Not that I'm aware of, and I can certainly keep them informed of what's going on.
Wonderful. And I apologize for the late notice about this hearing to your individuals. That was an oversight on my part because I was out of town last week. And then Mr. Haberman.
Yes.
I believe you requested Mr. Brown, and I don't have his name in front of me, but he's listed as Whiskey Rock Planning on the call for.
Yes, Jeremy Grimm. Whiskey Rock Planning.
Jeremy Grimm. And remind me, he is your architect or engineer?
Planning consultant.
And do you want him participating in all of these proceedings? And the practical implication of that is that he would get all communications filings and be included on the certificate of service.
Yes, please.
And what about with Mr. Brown?
Same with Scott Brown. Yes.
Okay, and remind me what his title is.
He's our civil engineer.
And Mr. Brown, do you work for Valiant Idaho LLC, or do you have a separate association?
No, I have a separate association. We're contracted with Valiant to do engineering services, but I'm with James A. Sewell and Associates LLC.
Can you spell that? I got the James part.
James A. period Sewell, SEWELL LLC.
Okay. And then I see a Kelly Urbanek. I can't get her full last. Oh wait, it's with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as well. And then I have a James Joyner joining this call. Do we know who he's associated with?
He is also with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Perfect. I'm just getting notes taken for all our participants here today. All right. This is the purpose of this call is to get and Ms. Urbanek's audio isn't working. She can hear, but she cannot participate, it looks like. That's fine, Ms. Urbanek, to the extent you need to enter anything in the chat, I will note it for the record. The purpose is to set this matter for public hearing. There is, it sounds like, significant public interest in this proceeding, given the number of comments that the Department of Lands has received to date. So I have a few logistical questions first, but I will turn it over to Ms. Winters and Ms. Kaufman to discuss the orderly presentation of evidence for all parties' positions in this place and for purposes of taking public comment.
So typically what has happened in cases like this in the past and one I recall specifically a few years ago is either the applicant or IDL will present their case first or their information. I know typically in the hearings that you and I have had together, Ms. Hayes, you've had IDL go first. In this case, it may be more appropriate to have the applicant present their case, but I don't have a strong feeling regarding that. But what we've done is have IDL and the applicant, and if there are a specific objector, they would provide comment. Since the Army Corps is involved, if someone from Army Corps would want to provide comment or their case. And then after that, well, again, what we've done in the past is open it up for public comment for any members of the public who are in attendance.
Okay, that was my initial inclination as well. Because I haven't seen any of the position statements yet, I will wait until the pre-hearing scheduling conference, and I have those in my possession to determine what makes logically the most sense between the applicant and the Department of Lands. And then the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be given an opportunity for whatever their position is once the applicant and the Department of Lands have been provided an opportunity to take their position. Those statements will be time limited, given the number of public comments. I was doing the math through, if all 240 written comments show up and are limited to only 3 minutes of time, that's still 12 hours of testimony. So we will need to put some reasonable constraints on the presentation of evidence, both for the parties and for any members of the public that may provide comment. Okay, so with that, the next question I had is there an intent by the Department of Lands to publish in the Sandpoint area a notice of this meeting?
Yes, there is. IDL publishes notice of these type of public hearings for, I believe it's 2 weeks. In whatever the local, so it would be in the Bonner County Daily Bee. Mike, can you correct, is it 2 weeks that you published for?
Correct. It needs to be IDL states once a week for 2 weeks prior to the hearing. So we would do two notices, 2 weeks before the hearing. 1 week.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Amer, for that. I will put into my order that you will be doing the publication 1 week before and 2 weeks before in the Bonner County Daily Bee, and that if you need to correct that or change that to a different publication, my familiarity with that area is that is the most widely read newspaper up there.
Just to be clear, we may do it sooner. In past public hearings, we'd like to give, I should say, the public at least a month notice if we can. IDL rule states it must be at least 2 weeks, but if we could give 3 or 4 weeks,
I appreciate that clarification, Mr. Amer.
That was a little garbled. Jeremy Grimm here. Is anyone else getting that a little garbled, or is it my side?
I believe Mr. Amer's audio is a little bit, but what I gathered from that is they will publish probably 3 to 4 weeks out, although the IDAPA rules only require them to publish at least 2 weeks out. All right, and then the other question, logistical questions I had related to location of the hearing. I flagged the fairgrounds, although I don't know if it's open for public use. Schweitzer Mountain Resort appears to have a fairly large conference room, although that's the logistics of getting up and down the mountain for the general public. And then Sandpoint has a high school that I believe would be big enough. Does anybody have any location in mind beyond those 3 that they think would be large enough to accommodate? I'd say probably a minimum of 300 people, if we assume that everybody that submitted a public comment shows up in person.
Those sound
Okay.
like appropriate locations. I think the high school would probably be the best, just in terms of space availability. Fairgrounds work as well.
Yeah, the high school was my first inclination, just given that it's central location to that downtown area. So I will try to make arrangements with the high school first, fairgrounds second, and if neither of those are available, I'll probably ask the parties for input on a third preferred location. And then finally, because we have a hearing deadline of September 22nd and significant interest in this process, if we set the hearing before the deadline of the 22nd, my inclination would be to accept written comment from the public for consideration until the deadline of September 22nd. Does anybody have any objection to that process? Ms. Kaufman?
No objection here.
Okay, Mr. Haberman?
Nope, no objection.
Okay, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers?
No objection from us.
I
Great.
do have one question, if you don't mind. Do you restrict or limit submissions of greater than 1 page? My concern is we might get a big file dump at the last second and not have the ability to rebut or address it in our presentation.
That is a legitimate concern. I have not seen the actual objections to date, so I'm not sure kind of where people are lying, whether they desire for this marina to be built or they object to this marina being built and on what grounds. So I will creep that deadline up to, let's see. Problem with too many screens is trying to figure out how to get your mouse to the right one. Okay, looking at the calendar, the 22nd is a Friday. So any objection to moving that deadline? Well, let's set the hearing first and then logically work back to when the public comment should close.
Sorry, if I could just ask one question.
Absolutely, Ms. Murdoch.
So the Corps will be putting out a public notice soon of the application, and the public notice will be available for review and public comment for about 30 days. So if we could, when thinking about scheduling, keep that in mind, that there will be this period where during the public notice, we'll probably get a hearing request on our part. And so if we could set it out 30 days, that would be ideal.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is doing a separate public comment on the application with a 30-day window. So if it opened today till August 24th and you're asking for that comment period to close, is that for purposes of what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers position will be at the public hearing?
Very likely, yes. And
Okay.
certainly anticipating any sort of requests for public hearing or various comments. It looks like James might have a comment as well.
Yeah, and just let me pipe in. We wouldn't likely have a position during the hearing. We always portray ourselves as, and we are in a neutral capacity. We don't take a position in advocating for or against a project, and so we would not have a position. We would simply be in a receiving mode at the public hearing. And so we typically will do a public notice. We gather those comments, and for a couple of reasons, we would then move into a public notice, a public hearing, and that would be interest in the project, which obviously there's quite a bit of local interest in the project, and or if we thought we would get additional information from the hearing that we didn't receive in the notice or in the public comment period. And so we typically do the public comment first and then do the portion of the hearing, but we're anticipating we're going to get requests for hearing. But in that, we would just be again in a receiving mode. We would just listen to comments that were that the public had.
Okay, and Mr. Joyner, just to clarify, would any hearing that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers holds be separate and apart from this Idaho Department of Lands hearing, or were you intending to fold them into one and the same?
We were hoping to just fold any hearing that we would have into this one, and so we're trying to, you know, and be economic in that use of time and not hold a separate hearing, but hold a dual hearing. So that's the intent.
And it the time frame would be, I think, likely the 404 notice would go out on August 1st, and so the time frame for that would be 30 days. So it'd probably close around August 30th.
Okay, and then just for my own information, will the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers be issuing an order that is separate and apart from the recommended order that I will be issuing to the Department of Lands?
Yes, that's correct. We will do our permit process separate, and like Mr. Joyner said, we'll simply be taking the information learned during our comment process, whatever's gained through the public hearing process, and mailing into our decision.
Okay, that helps me understand all of the different pieces a little bit better here. So it looks like we will be setting a hearing later than August 30th, which puts us into the first week of September at the earliest that a hearing can be held. And I have a conference in Seattle I'm scheduled to attend the 12th through the 15th. Obviously, if that's the only week that works, I can cancel the conference and just send my superior, Mr. Nichols. So with that, is there a date preference? I'll start with you this time, Mr. Haberman.
Obviously, our motivation is to do this as soon as practical. So earlier the better in September for us, understanding that we got to coordinate quite a few different folks' schedules here.
Okay, and then does other than the August 30th time to get your comment period closed, Ms. Murdoch, does the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have a date preference?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, no preference from us other than having it after that 30th or Labor Day weekend, and probably avoiding the Labor Day weekend as most folks would be out of town then.
Okay, and then Ms. Kaufman, do you have a date preference?
I will defer to Ms. Winters and Mr. Amer on a date preference.
My calendar is open through early December.
Okay, and then Mr. Amer, do you have any conflicts in those first 3 weeks in September?
It doesn't look like it. I think I have a kids soccer tournament at some point, but as long as I guess I'd say as long as it's not on a Friday, I should be good.
Okay. Well, with that, I could accommodate a hearing the week of the 18th. It looks like.
And could we do the first week of September?
We could do the first week of September. The holiday is that Monday. And
7th or 8th?
yeah, well, I was scheduled to be on vacation on the 8th, but maybe I can just make my flight directly to where I was going.
7th is fine. 7th would be fine.
How does the 6th look for people since it's an after 5 hearing?
Fine by me.
Ms. Winters and Mr. Amer.
That works for me.
That works for me.
And then Ms. Murdoch, Mr. Joyner, and Ms. Urbanek, 9-6.
That worked the core as well.
Okay.
That works.
A procedural question. If by chance 240 people show up at 3 minutes, do you continue a hearing at a set time and continue it to the following date?
Potentially, I think that that's something that we can handle in our pre-hearing conference about how we will handle overages. My intent is to set a hearing with a 3-hour limit, potentially 4 hours, given that we're having it held at 5 p.m. at night. If the comments are generally duplicative of one and another, I've toyed around in my head. We could either just cut off comments, open comments to only new information, or if people want to, by visually like stand up and say, if you agree with the position that this person has just asserted, I don't need you necessarily to give your separate comments. Please just stand up to indicate that so that we can have a view of how many people agree or disagree. But like I said, until I actually have those 254 or 240 written comments that Department of Lands has received to date, I don't really know where the split is on if this is a 50-50, yes, we want a marina, no, we don't want a marina, or the rationale for why. So that'll be easier for me to wrap my head around on how to coordinate, but we can hold 9/7 as an overflow date if we need additional time.
And as a quick follow-up, Ms. Hayes, yes, the decision is based on the standards, right? It's not a popularity contest, or am I misunderstanding what you're saying if half the room stands up and is not in favor of the marina? This is a pretty bright standard that you're going to be deciding on, right?
That's correct. It has to do with the Department of Lands regulatory regulations and whether the proposal is in compliance with those regulations. I just don't want a single person in that room to feel like their position hasn't been heard.
Good.
In the consideration of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, I am going to be setting deadlines a couple weeks before our hearing date for Department of Lands position and the applicant's position. To be stated, Ms. Kaufman and Ms. Winters, do you have a preference on whether those are simultaneous or staggered?
I don't have a preference.
Mr. Haberman, do you guys have a preference on whether Department of Lands says their position first, you respond, or you do your position first and they respond, or whether you do it at the same time?
I think in this case, I would rather have Department of Land state their position first. Again, since it's a technical compliance issue with your code, I think that might be the best way to go, rather than let it become, just an anti-development process, rant and rave.
Okay, I will have IDL submit their statement, and then your statement will be due 7 days after that. I'll put those deadlines in the notice of scheduling order. And then Ms. Murdoch and Mr. Joyner, the way I heard it is that you will not be submitting a statement. Do you desire a deadline to submit a summary of the written comments that you received prior to the hearing?
I don't think we will need that. We weren't intending to submit the comments that we received to this hearing.
Okay, and Mr. Joyner, do you agree with that position?
Yes.
Okay, and then other than pre-hearing statements, Ms. Kaufman, you'll have to educate me. Do we need witness and exhibit lists in these types of proceedings?
I think it would, yes, I think it would be helpful. I don't anticipate, although I don't know yet, and Ms. Winters and I will have to talk to Mr. Amer, what sorts of exhibits IDL might be presenting. I think out of fairness to the applicant and everyone involved, it would be helpful for all the parties who are presenting, aside from the public witnesses, to provide at least exhibits in advance of hearing.
Okay, so I will have those deadlines in the order as well. You are not required, Mr. Haberman, to list public testimony in favor of your proposal, because public comment will be permitted. So unless it's someone specific to your project that can further educate on how it's in compliance with the technical standards of the Department of Lands, that won't be required. And then I think we'll probably address closing arguments more logically at the pre-hearing status conference, which will be is September. Ms. Murdoch, do you need to have the pre-hearing status conference after the close of your acceptance of comments, or can we hold it before then?
No, we don't. Our intent would simply be to all of this as a neutral decision maker, and not to present evidence or make any sort of statement as to the various merits of Mr. Haberman's application.
Okay, then I will set the pre-hearing status conference for August 28th. And that's where we can iron out and discuss some of these logistical details, including the date that public comment will be accepted for consideration. Mr. Grimm, to address your concerns, we have, that'll give me enough time to know what the position statements are, what the public comments are, and to set a reasonable time so that if you were to rebut any of the public comment or desire to rebut any of the public comment, that we set a deadline for when we accept that, well in advance of the September 22nd close of evidence hearing deadline. So we will set that deadline at the August 28th status conference.
Could you
So
just,
quick question for you. Obviously IDL will present first. What in a hearing such as this, where we're talking about technical compliance, obviously with your regulations, what would the applicant's statement look like, or what should or would we consider making a statement about?
In your pre-hearing statement?
Yes.
So IDL's, let's just, I don't know what their position is, but IDL will put forward their statement in general that says these are our regulations. This is why it does or does not comply with our regulations. If the statement says this is why it does comply with our regulations, you can simply say we agree it complies with our regulations and you should grant the permit. If it says it does not comply, then your statement should say why you think it complies or why you think the regulations should be, you should have an exception from the regulations for purposes of this project.
Fair enough. Understood. Thank you.
Okay. And then because not everybody is fully represented in these proceedings, I'm going to give my caution on ex parte contact, which would be contacting this hearing officer without including all interested parties on that communication. We can technically answer process questions, which is why Mr. Haberman, I was able to get Mr. Brown and Mr. Grimm on this phone call with you. But my preference is always to include all interested parties on all communications, even if it's a process question. I will make myself available to you for a status conference at any point in time. So as we're working through this process, if you need to talk to me before the pre-hearing status conference on August 28th, simply make that request to the filings email address and to Miss Manick, Elaine Manick, and get a date available on my calendar, and then we can jump on a Zoom call. I find that that's the easiest way to make sure everybody's getting the same information at the same time and in the same manner. So with that, I don't have anything further on my list to address today. I will be issuing an order here today or tomorrow that memorializes what we discussed. Ms. Kaufman and Ms. Winters, do you have any other things you would like to address?
No, I do not.
All right, Mr. Haberman, anything else you would like to address?
No, thanks.
I
Okay.
have just one minor, Ms. Hayes, the pre-hearing status conference, could you just give a real quick summary of what typically occurs at that?
Yes, so we reconvene, we make sure that the date for the hearing still works for everyone, that we think the location is going to be appropriate. We discuss the presence of a court reporter, whether transcripts are going to be ordered by any of the parties. We'll discuss the deadline for public comment and any response time for when the evidence closes, which is what triggers my deadline for a decision 30 days after that. We discuss the need for potentially a Zoom link so that we can get that set up. I have my checklist right here, so because I had a few of these today already. We'll discuss any evidentiary issues of what needs to be admitted, whether people are stipulating to the admission of each other's exhibits, any kind of objections if we have expert testimony or witnesses that may not necessarily be relevant to the issues in the proceeding. We'll put time limits on the comment period and how we're going to handle the volume so that there's a reasonableness to these proceedings, but everybody still feels like they had a full and fair opportunity to be heard. And then order of the presentation of evidence and what makes the most sense. So it's similar to this call, but as we get closer, the logistics of the actual physical proceeding are more ironed out at that point in time, just because at that point I have more information available to me about the respective positions and where the dispute may actually lie, so that we can potentially narrow some areas just to the ones of pure disagreement, as opposed to having to unnecessarily discuss areas where we might actually agree.
And one final question, thanks. The release of public comments, is that in one tranche or is it a rolling release? Is it a file share? What's that process?
Ms. Kaufman is coordinating with Ms. Manick to get the emails in native format to our office. We will then PDF those and do what's called bait stamping, which will give them an identifier mark so that we all know what document we're talking about or what public comment we're talking about. Or if I cite to them in my decision, you'll know where to find that information of where I got that information. And then I'll just ask Ms. Kaufman to set a schedule internally for herself that as public comments come in, that she supplements those to our office so we can supplement them to the parties, either weekly or every other week, whichever makes the most sense based on the volume.
We will do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Haberman, Mr. Grimm, Mr. Brown, any other questions from your side of things?
No, thank you.
Okay, and then from the.
I'm sorry, I do have one more. If this is going to be a consolidated hearing between the Corps and IDL, is it typical the presentation covers or the applicant's presentation covers both aspects? We don't have to split them and bifurcate them and speak to one and then speak to the other. Can you provide any guidance on that?
That's my understanding from the exchange Mr. Joyner and I had, but I'll let him clarify.
Yes, if the applicant could cover both in their presentation, they don't necessarily have to bifurcate it, but simply again, our purpose for the public hearing is simply to explain the application and the project was received and our role in all this. If the applicant could simply explain what the project is from the core perspective, that would certainly help the public commenters understand how to speak to that.
And to that point, in some of the hearings I do, it's quite specific. When you're creating a record, you need to, certainly reference the application, the parcel number, the location, the geography. Is it best practice to do all that, or is it assumed that by simply referencing the application that we're covering, and we're not going to have an error because we don't give the longitude and latitude?
Not from the core perspective. I think those documents will be available to the public, and so if you want to simply refer to it in a more common sense or public understanding sense, that's fine, I would think.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of that information is in our public notice, so there's no need to, I think, have that level of detail in the hearing.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, and then from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers perspective, any questions you have for me about these proceedings or comments that you would like to provide at this time?
I don't think anything for me. Thank you.
Ms. Murdoch?
Nothing for me. I was just checking to see if Kelly had anything, or Ms. Urbanek, but nothing from her as well.
Okay, that sounds great. If Mr. Haberman is okay with it, I might reach out to Ms. Kaufman and Ms. Winters to understand the Corps' participation in these proceedings a little bit better, so that I am not overstepping what Department of Lands has asked me to do, and interfering within their purview of what they're here to do. Are you okay with that, Mr. Haberman?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much. All right, well, I will be issuing an order in the next couple of days. And like I said, if you guys need me anytime between now and August 28th, make that request through filings and Elaine, and otherwise I will see you at the end of next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.